conference, and let us start it with prayer. Glory to Jesus Christ. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Father Roman Fijas, and I have Taras Kurelets here with me. And on behalf of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies, we would like to welcome you at the conference, which is called the Eastern Catholic Churches, Can They Speak with One Voice? This conference will be held in 2 languages today, so technically, if you are participating in the conference and you would like to listen to us in Ukrainian, please choose the button interpretation at the button of your screen.
Choose the interpretation button in the bottom menu and choose language English. Ми розпочинаємо.
So we are commencing our event with a prayer, and I would like to invite the Reverend Sviatoslav to start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Скарби дібрі життя подай, прийди і вселися в нас, і очисти нас від усякої скверни, і спаси благі душі наші. Пресвятая Богородице, спаси нас, Сина і Святого Духа. Амінь.
І Сина і Святого Духа. Амінь. Дякую. І з молитвою.
And with the prayer, let us start working. And I would like to remind you of the topic of our conference once again. This is Eastern Catholic Churches. Can they speak with a single voice? This conference is a part of a more large-scale discussion, which is called the Eastern Catholic Church, the mission of unity and Catholicism. So we are going to work in the following way today. So we will be thinking about the multifaceted voices of Eastern Catholic churches and their contribution to the universal church. And also we will be thinking of how Eastern Catholic Church could speak with one voice facing the challenges of today. And we have invited speakers with very rich academic contribution, and we would like to invite the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, His Beatitude Sviatoslav, to deliver the welcoming word. So thank you very much for joining this conference. Thank you for taking care of our Institute of Ecumenical Studies and for supporting us in our initiatives. So the floor is yours. Glory to Jesus Christ. So, your Beatitudes, Reverend Doctors, Reverend Fathers, brothers and sisters, participants of this conference, first of all, I would like to express my happiness and pleasure that the Institute of Ecumenical Studies of the Ukrainian Catholic University organizes a conference like this. And I'm especially happy that we are commencing this conference in the evening, and we'll continue it on the day of St. Clement, who was very much revered by the Patriarch Joseph, and well, they are very much connected with the first springs of Christianity in Ukraine. And well, we know that Pope Clement was a very important ecumenical saint, especially for our Kyiv interconfessional Christian context. And at the same time, I would I wish that the Institute of Ecumenical Studies at the Ukrainian Catholic University continued organizing various meetings and conferences so that people understand that the work for the unity of churches and ecumenical activity is the priority of our churches, as it was decided by the First Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church 30 years ago, when his beatitude Lubachevsky came back to Ukraine, and it was held in Lviv in May. The topic that you have chosen for today's discussion, the churches and whether Eastern Catholic churches can speak with one voice. This topic may seem provocative to some people, but first of all, it's necessary to underline a very positive fact that in the present-day ecumenical dialogue, all parties, and in our case, we talk about the Orthodox and Roman Catholics, consider the Eastern Catholic churches as they are. Namely, these are the Eastern and local churches in connection with the Roman bishop and the Holy See. And they want to learn more about our ecclesiological identity. In the end of the 20th century, the fact that the Eastern Catholic churches have their separate ecclesiological identity and moreover their own ecumenical vision or concept was not clear to many. Well, we were very often looked down at, and we were considered to be the fruit of union efforts, and some of even considered us the traitors of the Eastern Orthodoxy. We can recall the discussion of Pedro Palamatsky, where he writes about the dead end of the International Ecumenical Commission in Baltimore in 2000. But due to the real dialogue, the majority of Orthodox churches consider us a sister church. And for the Eastern Catholic churches to have their own voice and their communion with the Catholic Church and the Catholic Orthodox dialogue, that was worked on by the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church a lot, which has been updating and modernizing its ecumenical stand quite a lot and doing that continuously, and having a dialogue with the representatives of different denominations. So the question whether Eastern Catholic churches can speak with one voice, I believe that yes, they can and they should do that. And I would like to recall the latest events, in particularly the events of 2018 and 2019, and thus what they started for the Eastern Catholic churches of at least in Europe to start speaking with one voice. It all started with the interpretation of one term. After the visit, Pope's visit to Romania, that's the context of 2018, our Orthodox brothers from the Moscow Patriarchate started filling the term uniatism with a different sense. As you know, in the Russian language, it sounds like uniatstvo, and they mixed two notions. On the one hand, they spoke of the way, the method, the model of combining churches. So they were talking about the unitism as a model which was recognized as such that will not have any place in the future. But on the other hand, well, they named the Eastern Catholic churches like that. So by condemning unitism, they actually condemned or denied the right to existence of the Eastern Catholic churches. So this mutation of the term of unitism caused many misunderstandings. And I remember that in 2018, I had a meeting with Pope Francis, and I told him about that. I told him that we need a new understanding in the context of your pontificate of the role, the mission, and the content of the Eastern Catholic Churches, in particular when it comes to ecumenism. Because we've been talking that the work on the unity among the Christians belongs to the nature, to the sense, to the calling of the Eastern Catholic Churches. And answering my request, Pope Francis said, "Mi offro per questo lavoro incontro." That means that I am ready to be the victim for this work. And that was when we started working on organization of the next annual meeting in Rome. That was the meeting of the Eastern Catholic Churches of Europe, called COCHA. So every year, Eastern Catholics of Europe come to these meetings which are dedicated to a particular topic. So the first meeting like that was held in 2022 because the war broke out in Ukraine, and we could have had difficulties. Well, the meeting was supposed to be in Armenia this year. And in 2019, in the context of this meeting, we organized a research conference which was held in Rome on the 12th to 14th of September and was called Ecumenical Mission of Eastern Catholic Churches in Europe. So we actually started having serious discussions about whether Eastern Catholic Churches in Europe can and should speak with one voice. In particular, what was their ecumenical mission? And what concerned all the participants of this meeting, they believed that this was the best meeting of the Eastern Catholic Churches of Europe at the top level, with the participation of the first supreme representatives of the Roman Curia. And everyone was trying to answer the question, what is this ecumenical mission of the Eastern Catholic Churches? Well, how to speak about ecumenism with one voice. We managed to publish the proceedings of this conference in Italian, and our church translated these proceedings into Ukrainian. We wanted to publish it on the 75th anniversary of the Pseudo Council. This translation is already ready. We presented the Italian language variant at the Metropolitan Chambers of the Saint Sophia in Kyiv, together with the presentation of our ecumenical concept of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. The Ukrainian translation will be published. It's already ready, and it will be published in Duch и Litera publishing house, and we hope to see it in the nearest future. So life makes us, Eastern Catholics, speak with one voice. Interestingly, in the context of Europe, these are not only the Byzantine Catholic churches have their present. Europe has the Maronites, Marokites, Armenian Catholics, Syro-Malabar, church representatives, and so on. So we have the Eastern Catholics not only from Europe, but also from Middle East, and we invite them to cooperate. And it's interesting that a joint resolution of this meeting of 2017 was the beginning of the work on the common ecumenical concept of Eastern Catholic Churches of Europe. We have started that work, and I wrote letters to the leaders of Eastern Catholic Churches in Europe, asking them to propose their theologists to participate in this working group to develop this concept. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic and then because of the war in Ukraine, this work has been stalled. But we have all agreed that we really need a concept like that. And this joint voice of Eastern Catholic churches about ecumenism is the first and thematic element of our joint voice in the European context in general. So some may say that at first glance, the Eastern Catholic churches should speak with one voice. The others may say that it's worth remembering that each of these churches has their traditions, their rights, their peculiarities of the cultural and worldview character. But this unity of voice cannot deny the unity in divergence, because it could cause the harmonious multifacetedness of voices. And it's also very important to preserve the wisdom, because we preserve our humility, because they are the things that unite the Christians, just as the ignorance divides people. And we should not forget that the sin of pride was the reason of descent. So we should not impose our views or our understanding on others, even when we speak about the joint mission. And we should remember that God blesses the meek. So I would like to wish God's blessing to everyone participating in this conference, and may God bless everyone here, and let the Holy Spirit make your hearts and your minds clear and open to joint and very effective theological discussion. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Слава навіки. Так, слава навіки. У нас пропало трохи світло, але
Unfortunately, we have some issues with electricity because we have power outage, but it's possible for us to continue our conference. And first of all, His Beatitudes, thank you for your reflections and your good words, because your ideas are very valuable to us. It's very interesting for us to learn more about this joint ecumenical concept of Eastern Catholic churches, because you know that our Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church already, it's practically the singular church which already has a ready-made ecumenical concept, and that would be really great for all Eastern Catholic churches also to draft a similar document. And this conference would not
жертовної підтримки наших
have been
жертводавців.
possible without the support of our donors. We have one of the funds, CNEVA, which is headed by Dr. Adriana Barra. She is a new director of CNEVA in Canada. And before that, she was the head of the Canadian Center for Ecumenism in Montreal. Dr. Barra, you are welcome to have your welcome word. Over to you, Dr. Barra.
Your beatitude, your praises, fathers and professors and all the participants, hello. Thank you very much to the organizer to give me the opportunity to say a few words to this important event. I just have 5 minutes to welcome everybody and to tell how happy we are that we are among the sponsor of this important event. True ecumenism, about which very few know, is the sincerely holy effort of Christians of different confessions seeking together the unity that the Church had in the first millennium. Many forgot the message that the Savior left while on the cross for all to be one. We all know the drama of Christians. For more than a millennium, they have been divided for more than any other religion in the world. And then what we have to do? The project organized and implemented by the Institute of Ecumenism of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv is an example of what we can do. It is an example of dialogue. And I hope that after the Eastern Catholic churches speak with one voice, you will go further and reach other churches, Orthodox, Protestant, Evangelical, and speak with one voice to the world. We must seek theological dialogue to see the roots of disagreement and try to heal them. Because there are many, as you know, there are many things on which the church don't agree. But as Pope Francis said, this cannot be done in the laboratory. We have to do ecumenism in journeying together along the way. In our journey, you at the Institute of Ecumenical Study have ecclesial, academic, and theological dialogues. And in the meantime, Kiniwa helped the church and people in need by continuing to be in the service of the poor, in hospitals, in wars, and where displacement shattered innocent lives. Thank you very much for this initiative, and I hope and trust that you have a successful and fruitful conference.
Support and hope for further cooperation. Дякуємо, доктор Баре, за вашу допомогу.
Thank you, Dr. Ibarra, for your support, for the support of your foundation, and we hope for future fruitful cooperation. There is another organization which has been supporting our institute for a while already, along with other churches being supported of Middle East and Eastern Europe. This is Via d'Orient fund, charitable fund, and it is headed by Reverend Pascal Golnish. He is Protestant, he is general vicarious for all Eastern Catholic churches in France. We have a video address from Mr. Golnish.
Дорогі друзі, що зібралися з нагоди цієї гарної екуменічної зустрічі, хотів би звернути вас у своїй дружбі та дружби Організації справи Сходу, що знаходиться у Парижі. Ми спостерігаємо з великим зацікавленням та захопленням за вашою діяльністю та подіями. З цієї нагоди хочу вітати усіх наших братів і сестер в Україні, до яких ми є надзвичайно близькими через нашу дружбу, наші думки, а також через солідарність. Отож, я вважаю, для латинників, якими зазвичай є члени Організації Справа Сходу, хоча від недавнього часу в нашій команді є українка, отже, для латинників є важливим, і ми є свідомими цього, що ми не можемо бути католиками.
And we know that it's very important. We understand that it's impossible for us to be Catholic without the presence of our Eastern brothers and sisters. And the more I am in relation with representatives of Eastern Church, I remain Latinist, and I understand that I become Catholicist because of this communication. I understand that Eastern churches know what to say, they know what to communicate to other countries, and I believe that Eastern churches also have what to say to Latin church. I remember what Pope II said, that the church has two lungs, and on the one hand we talk about a Latin church, and on the other hand we talk about Eastern churches. I also want to add the third lung. We talk about Eastern churches, South and east of Mediterranean area. And it goes without saying that our colleagues of Eastern churches and Orthodox churches, they have their history, they have their convictions, and they have their way of existence, synodality. And you are aware of the fact that Latin Church is working on synodality, and I think that you can really bring something which is close to the Second Vatican Council. Well, unfortunately, those texts have not been read by many Catholics, and it's important to talk loudly and also to remain not only primary, but also to think about synodality, which it strives for. Thank you, brothers and sisters of the East. Thank you, brothers and sisters of Ukraine, and I wish you fruitful collaboration. And I also wanted to make sure that our friendship will be continuing and that we will be praying for you. Thank you, Reverend Pascal, for your support of Ukraine, and the delegation from Oviedo-Orient for several times already visited Ukraine after an all-out war and the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, in particular in May. Reverend, together with his delegation, visited Lviv and many important centers where humanitarian assistance is being provided to see how churches are working. Thank you for your solidarity. I also would like to give the floor to the president of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies of the Ukrainian Catholic University, Ivan Tatsko. Father Ivan has been working for very many years with heads of churches. He was a personal secretary of Joseph, and also he worked with Lubativsky, and right now he is a member of a theological commission of the dialogue between Orthodox churches. We want to welcome you here, and we are happy to hear you. Could you please turn on your camera? Thank you. Father Ivan, we are ready to hear you. Could you please turn on your camera? It seems that Father Ivan has some technical problems with joining us. And I suggest that we start our academic conference, and then we will have the word of Father Ivan after Professor Alam. So we will start with our scientific conference. We have our presenters for today. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, your attitude, dear brothers and sisters. I'm happy to join this conference. I also would like to mention a couple of words. Right now, we are not in a big conference hall. This is a small room in a basement of the Ukrainian Catholic University, because you know that these are very harsh circumstances for Ukraine, and anytime we could hear the sound of an air alarm. We also have electricity from generator because we have power outages in Ukraine currently. But despite all these circumstances, we decided to hold the conference. I also wanted to express gratitude in organizing this conference to those people who helped us to find speakers, to establish contacts with other institutions. My gratitude goes to Nazar David, also the Dean of the Faculty of Eastern Churches, Jacob Pashi. And now I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Edward George Allen. He's a well-known scientist, and he really wanted to come here. He wanted to visit Ukraine. He already had tickets. He really wanted to demonstrate his solidarity, the unity in this very difficult situations, but unfortunately, he couldn't make it in person, but he will join us online. He is a professor of the Lebanon University, Notre Dame Laws University. He is a consultant of a papal council, and he is the head of the Department of Religious Culture and Philosophical Studies at his universities, and he has very many publications. He's also in editorial teams around the world. So over to you. We will talk about church reflections, about unity and the mission of Eastern Catholic churches. And could you please turn on your camera?
Yes, thank you, dear fathers, clerics, professors, students. I want to congratulate you for going ahead with this conference in spite of all the challenges. As was just mentioned, I wanted to be with you in person, but to my hands. I would like to reflect with you today on the topic of ecclesiastical unity.
На тему єдності.
The mission of the Eastern Catholic Churches,
Місія
ecclesiastical reflections on unity.
Східних Католицьких Церков і також про еклезіастичну традицію.
Can the Eastern Catholic Churches speak with one voice? I trust that my answer to this timely and profound question is not merely mine, but belongs to all those who work and strive to unite their voices, their words, to the one divine word,
Хто працює
eternally spoken by the Father.
над тим, щоб чути Боже Слово.
Thus, my answer is an emphatic yes. We of the Eastern Catholic Churches can speak with one voice, provided our voices are attuned to that eternal Word who became flesh in the womb of the Virgin by the power of the Holy Spirit. Such a provision first requires that our ears are attuned to the sounds of this same Holy Spirit. He who speaks without first listening says nothing, and his words sow nothing but division, corruption, violence, and death. For the unity that emerges in speaking with one voice necessarily entails the other transcendentals of being, since whatever is genuinely one is thereby also good, true, and beautiful. He who has ears, let him hear. Such listening demands a kind of martyrdom, a reverent Marian receptivity, and humble willingness to let the sound and sight and taste of being penetrate us, break us open, and unite those disparate chambers of our own being into unity. Only after our ears are attuned to this Holy Spirit of unity in diversity can we discern the value of the myriad conflicting voices we hear each day. And only then can we begin to speak the language of unity, of Catholicity, of truth, of goodness, and of beauty with genuine authority. These, I suggest, are the general truths that should underpin and guide our more specific and detailed inquiries into the questions before us. Difficult and complex questions revolving around identity, history, liturgy, law, and authority, all related in the context of the ultimate mission of Christ's Holy Church. To be sure, this mission is one and the same for all churches, East and West. But the particular histories and circumstances of each church are enormously complex, varied, and forever changing, to say nothing of the perennial challenges caused by human weakness and sin. Nonetheless, the mission must be clearly and confidently stated over and over again. We must not grow weary of proclaiming that the mission of the Church is nothing short of the divinization of the entire cosmos in all its diversity and hierarchy, and according to the proper capacity of each reality, individually and collectively. For human persons, this means an intimate and familial participation in the very life of the Holy Family of the Holy Trinity itself. Such a lofty eschatological mission, and one that the Eastern churches have consistently emphasized, is by no means escapist or hopelessly theoretical and abstract. On the contrary, because it involves the transformation of all that is, and because the philosophical, theological principle affecting this transformation is that grace works intimately through, with, and in nature precisely to fulfill it. And such a universal Catholic mission is as radically practical and down to earth as could be. A corollary principle at work in this process of Catholic conversion is that faith perfects reason. It does not destroy or manipulate it. In this light, then, let us turn attention to the concrete mechanisms through which the Eastern Catholic churches might be able to speak with one voice. First, of course, we have the distinct voices of the various patriarchs and bishops, whom, in spite of notable achievements in the decades after Vatican II, do not usually enjoy the unity that comes from putting on the mind of Christ, even within their own churches, alone with the leaders of other Eastern churches. Victories of these diabolical forces and the social structures of sin which they have managed to build up over centuries, there is also just the ordinary twofold darkness into which we have all been born, named sin and ignorance. Here, it is the latter, namely ignorance, that I would like to reflect upon in the concrete terms of how to overcome it. As Christians, whether Eastern or Western, we know the remedies all too well. Grace and faith, we say, and rightly so. But this is precisely what I mean by saying that we know these remedies all too well, because we often forget or neglect the other parts of the formula. Yes, grace, but grace working in and through and with nature in order to fulfill it. Faith, absolutely, but faith perfecting reason, never destroying or manipulating it. When Christians have gotten these principles right, the results have been astonishing. Celebrated accomplishments in music, in architecture, in science, in literature, in art, and perhaps most important of all, at least in terms of helping to generate and organize all the energy presupposed in these moral and intellectual triumphs, the Catholic University, the greatest institutional achievement of the Middle Ages. It is here precisely through the mechanism of the university that the Eastern Catholic churches have a tremendous opportunity to discover and support one another and to speak with one voice. In this context, then, I would like to speak for a moment about an initiative I am working on related to harnessing the intellectual and spiritual energy of the world's 8 Eastern Catholic universities. About 5 years ago now, during a visit to Lviv, I first discussed with a colleague of mine from UKU the possibility of establishing a consortium of Eastern Catholic universities. Encouraged by his response and by the enthusiastic response of Bishop Boris Gutsiak when I shared the idea with him during a seminar in Vienna just a few months later, I began contacting elect professors and leaders from the world's 8 Eastern Catholic universities. Because half of these institutions are in Lebanon, my own university, Notre Dame University, Loizi, being one of 4 Eastern Catholic universities in Lebanon, I assumed the task in Lebanon would be much easier than it has proven to be. But some progress is being made on the Lebanese front. The next task was to reach out to the other 4 universities outside of Lebanon. Now, since one of these institutions is Ukrainian Catholic University, and since exchange and cooperation between this university and my university has a decade-long history, the challenge was to get the other 3 on board by showing them the positive fruit that has come out of the cooperation between Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv and Notre Dame University in Lebanon. The other 3 universities in question here are Christ University in Bangalore, India, Syro-Malabar University, Ethiopian Catholic University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Addis Ababa, Ethiopian Catholic University, and the Catholic University of Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan, a Chaldean Catholic University. During my trips to Ethiopia, I was able to make some progress with the university there, but have not been able to follow up due to the recent political instability and violent civil strife. With respect to the Chaldean University in Iraq, other challenges emerged that I will not get into here. But with Christ University in Bangalore, India, substantial progress has been made and was made when a senior ranking member of the religious order that runs the university agreed to become a member of the International Institute of Ethics and Contemporary Issues at the Ukrainian Catholic University, of which I am a member. And so why such a consortium? Why a consortium of Eastern Catholic universities? In one word, solidarity, and to strengthen one another in faith, hope, and charity. Although so few, we are not aware of one another's existence. This is a pity, because if the Catholic University is born from the heart of the Church, first, all the Eastern Catholic universities emanate from churches with ancient apostolic liturgy, ancient linguistic, cultural, intellectual, artistic diversity expressed liturgically is the very thing that makes the universal church universal. Genuine Catholicity demands complementary beauty of harmonious ecumenism and interreligious dialogue. Third, these universities have significant diaspora communities worldwide that are activated and can be activated to support such a consortium. Fourth, all these universities exist in the East, with 6 of these in the same time zone, north and south of Jerusalem, more or less on the same geographical line. The other 2, India and Iraq, are east of Jerusalem. Fifth, these universities have all been established in the late 20th and early 21st century after, and in many ways as a direct result of, Vatican II's decree on the Eastern churches. This decree, in fact, was a milestone in the ecclesiology of the Universal Church and a life-giving source that we, as Eastern Catholics, making up some 25 distinct sui juris churches or rites, must continue to return to for nourishment. For as we know, our churches for centuries were often viewed as mere appendages to the real Catholic Church, the Latin Church. It was certainly a development in ecclesiology when in 1894, the ordinary magisterium of the Church officially addressed this error in the encyclical by Pope Leo XIII, titled Orientalim Dignitas, on the dignity of the Eastern churches, wherein he stressed the unique significance of the Eastern churches' irreplaceable witness to the Church's unity, apostolicity, and Catholicity, implying that if the Church consisted in only the Latin Rite, it would not really be Catholic. That this theme was taken up and developed by the Church in her extraordinary magisterium at Vatican II in the 1964 document Orientalium Ecclesiarum on the Eastern churches is, as I have said, a milestone in the development of ecclesiology. Though one of the shortest documents of the Vatican Council, it was among the most momentous in terms of reaffirming the mystery of the Church's Catholicity and apostolicity, and that's its universal mission. As we know, the teaching sought to underscore the importance of the Eastern churches by more fully overcoming the ideology of Latinization, since it was this ideology that relegated the Eastern churches to the inferior position of appendages to the so-called real church. After the Vatican II document, the change in perception that Leo XIII put into motion gained great momentum, especially during the pontificate of John Paul II, whose mother had some connection, it seems, to the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. John's love and esteem for all the Eastern churches and his recognition of their unique test are expressed in a number of writings, most notably in his 1995 apostolic letter, Orientale Lumen, which marked the centenary of Pope Leo XIII's Orientalim Dignitas. And here in Lebanon, we were especially encouraged by his 1997 apostolic exhortation letter situation in last historic promise and emphasized the historical realities reaching back into Old Testament times.
Дуже дякуємо професору Алему за його готовність виступати на нашій
I would like to
конференції.
thank Professor Alem for his readiness to speak at our conference, and thank you for your opinions, for your ideas and solidarity. Thank you for all the efforts to create the consortium of Eastern Catholic Church you're working on. And we know that Professor Alem visited Ukraine, and you have readily noted that Eastern Catholics know little about each other. And that's why our meetings, our conferences, and our seminars exist to get acquainted, to support each other, and to express solidarity to each other. And now I would like to pass the mic to the president of the Ecumenical Studies, Father Ivan Daskot to deliver a welcoming word. Thank you for joining us. As I've already mentioned, Father Ivan is the representative of the Theological Commission for Dialogue between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. And as I've already mentioned, he was the personal secretary of Patriarch Joseph Slipej and also worked closely with Patriarch Miroslav Lubachivsky. So, Father Ivan, we are very happy to see you. Glory to Jesus Christ. I had some problems with connection, well, mainly for technical reasons. And my welcoming word will be very short because tomorrow I will be speaking in more detail, adding to all these multifaceted voices, this polyphony where all the churches create the symphony of the universal church. And I would like to express the gratitude to His Beatitude Sviatoslav, that he, despite the loss of his father, he still honored us with his presence at this conference. I cannot but mention the Lurverdurian, because if this were not for them, galvanizing our activity, which was very important, the Institute of Ecumenical Studies of the Ukrainian Catholic University might not have appeared. Probably it was because Professor Arjan Arzakovsky, who was the co-founder and who had close ties with the French world, we are very grateful to them for their solidarity and constant support. And we really hope to have very effective and fruitful cooperation in future. And I was very pleasantly surprised that Canada also has their plur, because as Adriana Bard mentioned, I knew that CNEVA is the Eastern World Association's meetings, which were held in the US. So we are very happy that they provide their moral and material support. So I don't have to speak about all the participants, because you see what kind of society we have here. These are great researchers, very honorable people, and the words by Professor Edward Allen, the first speaker, has already shaped certain trends for further work of our conference. And I can only reiterate the words of His Beatitude Sviatoslav. May God bless us all, and may the Holy Spirit bring light to our minds and souls. Thank you, and glory to Jesus Christ. Reverend Father Ivan, thank you. We will have a chance to listen to you tomorrow. So I will have an announcement about what the second day of the conference will be dedicated to. What concerns the work of our conference, I suggest we organize it in such a way that we listen to all speakers first, and then we answer the questions and lead our discussions. So now I would like to give the floor to Professor Dr. Ines Andali Marzaku, who is a professor of religion at the Seton Hall University of New Jersey and the director of the Catholic Studies and the founder of the Catholic Studies Chair at Seton Hall University, and she used to be the vice president for study of nationalities and is accredited by the UN organization Christians for relations with the Eastern Europe. She's been working with various media, which I probably should not be talking about right now. Thank you, Professor, for joining us, and we are waiting to hear your speech.
For inviting me, and I'm very excited. Actually, I'm writing to my colleague Charbel Alam now for a lot of projects that we can do together as Eastern Catholics, actually. So I'm going to focus on on a history that is kind of in the margins of the history of the Eastern Catholic churches. I've done a lot of research on this, and also I've done a lot of research on the Basilian monks of Grottaferrata, and also I've translated the life of Saint Nilus of Grottaferrata, that I'm sure that my colleagues know the importance of Saint Nilus and the importance of the Abbey of Grottaferrata. So why this topic? Of course, we have a lot of anniversaries to celebrate next year. And this, I always bring these anniversaries actually to my students, and they are very good starters of a conversation. For example, Balamad is one that is upcoming next year. And of course, the Second Vatican Council, where we are as Eastern Catholic churches with this. I hope you know that our group can come up with conferences. And also today is a very special day in the history of the church. It is that embrace between Patriarch Athanagoras and also Pope Paul VI, and the lifting of the of all the what went on, you know, before that. So it's a very, very special day, and actually I started my class with that. But now let's go on the topic of the Eastern Catholic Church of a very, Muslim country, actually, Albania. So next June 2023, Balamad document, Unitism, Method of Union of the Past and the Present, Search for Full Communion, will be 30. When Balamad Agreement came about, I was pursuing my doctoral studies at the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome. And besides, of course, the criticisms of calling the agreement, of course, heretic, and the Orthodox ecumenists as betrayers of orthodoxy and the true faith, there was much excitement among the students of the Pontifical Oriental Institute, which, since its foundation in 1917, has provided hospitality, knowledge, and training to generations of students coming from the Eastern Catholic churches. From the Maronites to the Syro-Malankarites, Malabars, Ukrainian, and other smaller Eastern Catholic churches, like the churches of Serbia, North Macedonia, and Albania. Balamad has not lost its significance, I think, as the issues related to Unitism and the Eastern Catholic churches are current and remain on the agenda of the Orthodox Catholic dialogue for different reasons. Very much on the agenda of the Catholic Orthodox ecumenical dialogue, for one. Pope Francis has specifically pointed in line with Balamad, saying that Unitism no longer functions. It is over. For me, it is also painful, unquote. Why did I start this paper with the 30th anniversary of Balamad's statement? First, the relevance and the importance, but also a way for our Eastern Catholic churches to prepare for the 60th anniversary of the Unitatis Redintegratio and Orientalium Ecclesiarium, two fundamental documents which prepare the way for JP2's Slavorum Apostoli, and several other documents issued by the same pontiff. My paper will focus on the history of a peripheral church, which is at the margins of the Eastern Catholic churches, which an unusual model of Unitism or Unia, and probably an unexpected country to have an Eastern Catholic church, because Albania, as you know, it is a Muslim country with a Muslim majority and with a very, very tiny Christian population, being between 10%, maybe less than 10% of Catholics, and also 8% Orthodox. Also in Albania are the mystical brotherhoods or the mystical Islam, like Bektashis and other mystical brotherhoods, which, by the way, were very, very open to a possible union of the Orthodox Albanians with the Catholic Church. Now, the periphery, I've studied periphery a lot in my research, and when you study the problems from the periphery, you really get some insights that the major Eastern Catholic churches might not provide. So I value the periphery and looking at the history of these marginal churches, in this case, the Eastern Catholic Church of Albania. So when did Albania first came across Eastern Catholicism? My first point is monks on mission or missionary monks. The Basilian mission of Himara, which is southern Albania. Southern Albania actually is very, most of the Orthodox population lives in southern Albania. And Himara or Kimara in Latin is in southern Albania. The Himariotes were Orthodox under the jurisdiction of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. But these faithful were almost forgotten by Constantinople. They were living on their own. They were on the periphery of the Ottoman Empire. So again, we have a motive of the periphery here. The Basilian monks of Grottaferrata and also other monks from Sicily, and I'm sure that you know the history of the Sicily and Calabria. There are a lot of Eastern Catholics there that have always been in communion with the Catholic Church. So they knew even this ancient Arbresh language. So the Vatican the Holy See used these missionaries to send them to Himara in southern Albania, in this very peripheral province, let's say, of the Ottoman Empire, and seek if the Imariots want to join the Catholic Church. So there were a lot of conversations and also letters that Himariots wrote to the Pope. For example, I found a very important document starting in 1577. So we are talking about the 16th century. Representatives of the people of Himar wrote to Pope Gregory the 13th, requesting the rebuilding of the episcopal residence, which had been destroyed by the Ottomans. And in the same letters, the Himariots, so the entire province, was asking unity with Rome. So through this, and the missionaries, you know, that came from Sicily and also Calabria, they played a role in this because they could talk, you know, even the language of the Himariots. They knew the language, they knew the traditions. So, and there was a lot of back and forth in this project, but nothing came to fruition. Actually, the response from Rome took forever. It was procrastination, etc. So, but the feature in this is that this movement really came from below. It wasn't something that was imposed from Rome. The thing that Rome did actually send these missionaries who could speak the language of the people, but also they knew the traditions of the people. Then a second phase is that of Archimandrite Germanos and the pro-Rome Orthodox movement, that this movement was kind of getting more ammunition, if you will, centuries later. Almost a century after the Basilian missions, another initiative for union with the Roman Church came from Elbasan. And Elbasan actually is very central Albania. And the population of Elbasan is half and half. It's Muslim, but also Christian, Orthodox in this case. And Papas Giorgio Germanos, he actually got all his people together, writing letters to Rome, expressing their desire to unite with the Holy See. And also in Elbasan were also Vlah population in Albania, that is also in other Eastern European countries, like, for example, the Romania. And those Vlachs, the family of my husband actually come from this group. They didn't have any problem with unity with Rome, because when they came from Romania, they had some. They've had a lot of conversations and also contacts with the Latin Church. It was exactly this time of pressure that was coming also from the Muslims, because at the same time the Muslims were pressuring Elbasan and were pressuring the population to convert to Islam, because the conversions to Islam in Albania, in comparison to other countries under the Ottoman Empire, they kind of continued until the 19th century. So even this is a particularity. So due to the Ottoman pressures, the Orthodox said, you know what, maybe we unite with Rome and unite with the Catholic Church. The Catholic population was not an issue there because Elbasan, most of the population, as I said, was Orthodox and Muslim. And then we saved the faith and survive, in other words. So these were that was the dynamic at that time of this conversion. So it was pressure from the Muslims and this papas who took the lead to convert the Orthodox, you know, in group, right, to the Catholic Church. Another political incentive, if we will, was that the role of Austria-Hungary, because Austria-Hungary at that time was the preserver of the Christians and especially the Catholics. So these people in the Orthodox of Elbasan say, at least, you know, we'll have a protectorate from Austria. So even this political situation, incentive, if you will, helped them to come to this thinking. What happened next, according to Catholic sources, and I've done a lot of research in the Vatican archive of the Oriental churches and also in the Vatican secret archive, the Archbishop of Durrës received this 5,000 Orthodox. He was preparing them to join the Catholic Church. Now, there was a lot of going back and forth with the Archbishop of Durrës because he noticed, the Archbishop, that these people were not really prepared, catechized to join the Catholic Church. And that was another thing that kind of delayed, because the Archbishop said, wait a minute, let's wait and prepare the people so that they conscientiously enter in unity with the Catholic Church. So, and of course, the means of communication at that time were not as they are today. And Rome took forever to respond to all this inquiries, and also the Archbishop that said, you know what, let's start a school for these people to catechize them. So there was a lot of back and forth, and years passed, and Rome was overdoing the process, procrastination. So it took in all around 29 years. And of course, the people couldn't, you know, resist this anymore and say, yeah, now we can look for another option. And the other option that came for the Orthodox of Albania in this time was autocephaly, actually, of their Orthodox Church, which they started the trajectory actually to receive the autocephaly in 1929, and this continued until 1937, actually, when the Patriarch of Constantinople granted autocephalous status to the Orthodox Church of Albania. So even that was a factor. But again, I don't think that Rome was very aggressive during these two phases of the movement of the Orthodox Christians of Albania to unite with Rome. Then it is the third phase that started in 1938. In 1939, actually, Italy occupied Albania, and Albania became part of the Kingdom of Italy. So the Orthodox kind of returned again to the idea of uniting with Rome. In 1937, they had even the autocephalous, the Church of Albania, the Orthodox Church of Albania had the autocephalous status. However, there were a lot of fights going on between the Albanian Orthodox and also the Patriarchate of Constantinople. So they say, you know what? Now that we are part of Italy, maybe we can return to those previous projects of uniting the Orthodox, and in this case, you know, the Orthodox that were not pleased with autocephaly, to Roman flock, become Catholics, always preserving their tradition. And of course, you know, Rome returned again to the monks of Grottaferrata, who in fact are not missionary monks. So in my view, it's a mistake. But the monks returned to Albania and began to talk to the population of Albania, especially in southern Albania. Again, the monks of Grottaferrata were not and are not missionary to go and convert the Orthodox. So Italy was giving a lot of incentives, economic incentives to the people. And unfortunately, some of these monks of Grottaferrata, they bought, as it is written in the documents, they bought believers. They bought converts, buying not with money, but they offered to them, you know, incentives like scholarships to go to Italy, maintaining some of the families, and so on and so forth. So Rome here, you can see a type of aggressiveness coming from Rome that was working with the political in tandem, in symphony, if you will, with the political situation that was going in Albania, Albania being part of the Kingdom of Italy. So it was this material incentives that I think these were not true and well thought of conversions. And as we know, this kind of unitism never works. And then I'm just going a little, because for the lack of time, of course, what happened next, Italy lost and left Albania. And also this project for the conversion of the Orthodox to Catholics and to the Catholic Church also failed. In the year 1945, the year 1945 signaled the beginning of the efforts of the Albanian communist government to exterminate religion throughout the country. In the same year, after his return to Albania from consultations with Rome, Nigris, who was the apostolic delegate for Albania, was arrested and expelled from the country as an undesirable person. The same with the bishop of with the bishops. So the persecution has started, and also these priests of who have converted to the Eastern Catholic Church, who have converted to have joined the Catholic Church. Even those priests were very persecuted. So kind of those prisons and what the church in Albania went through united this orthodoxy and also Catholicism, and also you know, the imams and the Bektashi brothers, who actually all were thrown into the communist gulag. And Albania actually proclaimed itself to be the only atheistic country in the world. So the persecution was extraordinarily tough for the religions. And recently, actually, I found a wonderful document that documents how one of these Eastern Catholic priests was treated in prison, and at the same time how he was left actually in the mud and died a terrible death, a martyrdom, actually, a martyrdom death. Now, where we are now, of course, there is an apostolic administration for Albania. They have the church that they have been during the time when Italy actually was when Albania was part of the Kingdom of Italy. The faithful, the Eastern Catholic faithful, I don't think that there are many right now, because for 50 years Albania was communist, atheist. So when religion was reintroduced in Albania, and we are talking about 1991, the missionaries, went and just looking at the population, what is there, they found out that most of the people who have converted to Eastern Catholicism, they either returned to Orthodoxy or they converted to the Latin rite of the Catholic Church. So now there is a church there. It is an apostolic administration, but this the movement in Albania to Eastern Catholicism, and also of the Orthodox to join the Catholics, to join the Catholic Church, was not successful. Now, of course, we make conclusions, right? Was the Byzantine Catholic movement in Albania an entire failure? Probably not. It proves, I think, that Uniatism, or an ecclesiology of return to the Catholic Church, was then obsolete as it is now. However, Rome, while not rejecting the opportunities for grace or the carrying out of Christ's command to preach the gospel to all nations, in the case of Albania, it responded cautiously to the pleas of the Orthodox Albanian faithful and clergy for union with the Catholic Church. So this kind of led to delays, and also because of delays and procrastination, it dispirited and people lost interest in the movement. Probably the only time some degree of enthusiasm was shown on the part of Rome was in 1939, when Albania was part of the Kingdom of Italy, and the following years, which coincided with the Italian occupation of Albania. Moreover, new affiliations of convenience tend to be deceitful, utilitarian conversions, so they were not real conversions. Thus, the Byzantine Catholic movement in Albania came to an end, but the fall of communism marked a new beginning for Albanians' religions. It was an end in which one learned and started anew, because to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from, a new beginning for the sorely tried Albanian people and its martyr church. And although the Eastern Catholic Church of Albania is a very, very, very tiny church, it had its martyrs. Thank you very much for your attention.
За те, що ви нагадали нам про ювілей, який
Thank you
зараз
for reminding us about the anniversary, this jubilee 30 days after Balamand. And in fact, the question of uniatism, which was part of the Balamand meeting, actually led to a crisis in 2000, which was mentioned by by Beatitude Sviatoslav. It's very important for us not to forget about this, not just to turn this page and forget about it, but also to refer to it in the future. So the issue of unionism actually will emerge once again in the future. Thank you once again. I also would like to invite Professor Yuri Avakumov, and I think that this is a well-known name at the Ukrainian Catholic University, especially to have external audience. I just wanted to say a couple of words. He is a historian of Christianity, late Middle Ages. He focuses on scholastics and attitude between popes, and he focuses on other historical periods. He'll be talking about the Henotic Unionist tradition in its historical context towards understanding the theological foundation of Eastern Catholic Christianity. Glory to Jesus Christ. His in the attitude, dear participants, dear students, brothers and sisters, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me to participate at this conference. And the impression that I've got is that recently the interest towards Eastern Catholic churches gradually, but is growing around the globe, because we see a range of different initiatives, I would see, as far as studies of Eastern Catholicism is concerned, and the dialogue revolving around it. That is why, for me, it's really joyful that we have this conference at one of the very important centers of Eastern Catholic Christianity, despite all difficult circumstances. That is why I really want to express my gratitude, my awe, and my respect to the organizers of the conference. I'm convinced that it will be a significant contribution into the study of Eastern Catholic Christianity. And I'll be speaking in English.
Bridge historiography and ecclesiology. It is instructive to explore the interplay of continuities and discontinuities in church history and theology, spanning centuries as well as different geographic locations and cultures, Latin, Byzantine, and Byzantine Slavonic. My paper is an invitation to start a discussion on one of such continuities that, in my opinion, has not received the attention it deserves in historical theology. It is the continuity of a theological tradition that, for want of a better word, could be called unionist or henotic, from the Greek word henosis, union. This tradition could perhaps also be called Irenic, since its representatives advocated Irene, peace between the churches. But the focus on the concept of union seems to be more appropriate. Late Byzantine adherents of union with the Roman Church called themselves henoumenoi or henotikoi, united. Despite undeniable differences in cultural contexts, there are a few essential features that unite all the united Eastern theologians and church leaders, irrespective of their time, ethnicity, and culture. I will focus on the Byzantine, Greek, and post-Byzantine, primarily Ukrainian unionist tradition, which constitutes the historical core of contemporary Greco-Catholic or Greek Catholic Christianity. Efforts to achieve reconciliation between the Roman Church and Byzantine Christianity began almost simultaneously with the rise of their disagreements and conflicts. Clashes between Old and New Rome, such as those in 867, 1054, and 1204, to mention only the best-known textbook dates, produced a vast amount of heated polemical literature, but also works of a more discreet and conciliatory nature. Starting from at least the late 12th and 13th centuries, a group of ecclesiastical personalities and intellectuals slowly emerged on both sides who advocated for peace and union between the churches. Attempting to cross the borderline of their own ecclesiastical culture, many of them devoted their time to the study of the language, traditions, and theological writings of their counterparts. Most of them traveled between East and West and made acquaintances and friends among Christians of the other church. Their literary activity provided a theoretical backdrop for the formal act of union between Rome and Constantinople concluded in Florence in 1439. Such figures existed on both sides. On the Latin side, one sees this primarily in the missionary efforts of the mendicants in the East that began already in the 1220s and reached its climax in the mid-14th century. On the Byzantine side, one finds personalities belonging to the Unionist group like Patriarch John Bacchus of Constantinople in the 13th century, Demetrios Kydonis in the 14th, Manuel Kalekas, Manuel Chrysoloras, Basilios Bessarion, Metropolitan Isidore of Kiev in the late 14th and 15th. Despite resistance against the conciliar decisions on union with Rome and their own Greek church, the Byzantine Unionists persistently defended the idea of church union, often at risk of being marginalized or even exiled or incarcerated, as in the case of John Bacchus, for instance. The Unionists of the late 14th and 15th centuries were at the forefront of the humanist currents of their time. One could mention such celebrated names as Cardinal Bessarion and Manuel Chrysoloras as examples of Byzantine humanists. Their contemporaries, Byzantine anti-Latin polemicists, derogatorily labeled them Latinophrones, Latin-minded, and often accused them of being traitors of their mother church. Following this foundational for the Unionist movement period, the entire epoch from 1439 until well into the 18th century can be called the era of church unions. Unions of Eastern Christianity with Rome were established frequently and in different ecclesiastical and cultural contexts, both on the level of national, local communities, as well as on the personal level. They were repeatedly renounced, forsaken, forgotten, and repeatedly retrieved and renewed. In light of the Florentine legacy, the distinction between adherents and adversaries of union, that is, between united or uniate and non-united, disunited Eastern Christians, played an important role throughout the early modern period, although the boundary between the two groups was much more fluid than it became in later centuries and could be more easily transcended. The Unionist theological tradition was represented for Greek Christianity after 1453 by John Plousiadenos, Leon Alatios, Petros Arkourios, and Neophytos Rodinos, to name just a few. For the Ukrainian context, the personalities and works of the Ruthenians, Ipati Poti, Joseph Felemin Rutsky, later Meleti Smotritsky, and early Petro Mohila could be seen as the most prominent. What constituted a unionist? There were at least 2 points on which they agreed. First, they recognized the special position of the Roman Church among Christian churches and deemed the Roman Pope to be the first hierarch in the Christendom. Secondly, they insisted on the freedom of Eastern churches to follow their own liturgical rites and disciplinary regulations. In the formulation of these 2 points, I intentionally avoid using strict canonistic terminology. The issue of primacy was at the core of the first point, but Unionists' views on this question varied. Some of them, like the Dominican Andreas Chrysobergus, for instance, came more closely to the juridical understanding of papal supremacy in the spirit of Innocent III and Boniface VIII. Others, like John Bacchus, or Joseph Philemon Rutsky, remained closer to the understanding of primacy as a primacy of honor. With the second point, on the recognition of the right to rule, я вибачаюся, я чую переклад, дуже голосно, український переклад. Чи можна щось з тим зробити? Тому що мені це заважає. With the second point, on the recognition of the rights, rules, and customs of the Eastern churches, views also differed. Some of the Unionists expressed concern only about some specific rights and opined, together with the Roman Curia, that the final word on the liturgical and disciplinary practices of their church should belong to Rome. Others viewed the problem in a much broader light and defended the right of the Eastern Church to stay faithful to her own liturgical and theological traditions in their entirety, including the creed without the interplay of these 2 points, the issue of Roman primacy on the one hand and the problem of the theological, liturgical, and cultural specificity of Eastern churches, generated in the thought of the Unionists an inherent tension between 2 poles, that of unity and that of diversity. For all of them, however, the establishment of peace and union with the Roman Church had the pragmatic priority and urgency, be it on a personal or in a general ecclesial level. I would argue that church and theology historians should consider the theological origins of Eastern Catholic Christianity not only against the backdrop of the confessional struggles of the early modern period, but also within the context of the Unionist or Henotic intellectual tradition that has its roots as early as in the 12th and 13th centuries. To be sure, dramatic changes occurred in religious and political spheres in the course of the transition from the Middle Ages to modernity. However, there is definitely much in common to all these different figures. There is a fascinating continuity here, spanning centuries and cultural spaces. Contemporary ecumenically minded discourse on East-West relations has developed a phobia of expressions like church union, unionist, and uniates because of their real or supposed lack of ecumenical political correctness. For the theological history of later medieval and early modern theology, however, the neglect of historical church unions and unionist thinking is unjustifiable. As imperfect as the unions of that period were, the history of unionist thought often exhibits fascinating engagement with intercultural challenges and ecumenical issues. Research on the Henotic or Unionist tradition had a curious history in the course of the last century. The Unionists came into the focus of denominationally charged discussions between Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic scholars. Their contradicting value judgments on the Unionists are especially conspicuous in the ecclesiastical historiography of the first half of the 20th century, that was formed by neo-scholastic and neo-Thomistic era of Roman Catholic education and academy. For a denominationally committed Roman Catholic scholar of that period, the Byzantine Unionists were allies of Catholicism in its apologetic effort. The very existence of Byzantine Unionists proved the truth of the Roman Catholic confession and testified that papal supremacy and other fundamental dogmas of the post-Tridentine Roman Catholic Church were always recognized in the Byzantine East, at least by its best representatives. The heritage of Thomas Aquinas played a special role in such perceptions of the Unionist movement. The very fact that the Unionists translated and admired Aquinas's works guaranteed, in the view of the Neo-Thomists and Neo-Scholastics of the early 20th century, that their theology was truly Catholic in the post-Tridentine sense. A fundamental shift in the Roman Catholic perception of the Byzantine Unionists occurred with the ecumenical turn of the Second Vatican Council and the dismantling of the neo-Thomistic system of education in the 1960s. In the post-conciliar period, the overall tenor of Roman Catholic scholarship changed and became increasingly ecumenical and sympathetic towards Eastern Orthodoxy. This resulted in a fading of interest among Roman Catholic scholars towards the Unionist tradition. Not that the Unionists remained fully without attention, but the main momentum and enthusiasm of post-conciliar Catholic research on the Christian East belonged undoubtedly to the Eastern Orthodox legacy, and not to those historical figures whose views and actions ran the risk of being perceived as anti-ecumenical by contemporary Orthodox partners in an interconfessional dialogue. The attitude of Eastern Orthodox theologians at first glance seems to be diametrically opposed to the Catholic judgments of the neo-scholastic era. This attitude was to a considerable degree determined by the neo-patristic movement in Orthodox theology that emerged in the period from the late 1930s to the 1950s, with George Florovsky and John Meyendorff being respectively the leading figures of its two generations. Reduced to four concise points, the main neo-patristic approach could be summarized as follows. Point number one, the Byzantine theological legacy, Byzantinism, the term of Florovsky, Byzantine patristics, Meyendorff's term, represent the genuine, authentic Orthodox theology. Point number two, the theology of Gregory Palamas is the high point of Byzantinism. Byzantine patristics and is one of the best fruits of Orthodox theology. Point number three, the authentic Orthodox and Byzantine theology is defined as antithetical to those Byzantine and post-Byzantine theologians who did not accept Palamite theology and who criticized it. The rejection of Palamite theology, according to neo-patristic thought, went together with a dependency on Western Latin influences. In other words, contrary to authentic, true Byzantium, there was also an inauthentic Byzantium, its pseudomorphose, a sort of anti-Byzantium, represented by the theologian agents of the Latin West, alien to the true Byzantine spirit. To this inauthentic Byzantium belonged all the Byzantine advocates of church union, according to neo-patristic school of theology. And finally, point number four, the Unionists were converts from Eastern Orthodoxy to Roman Catholicism. They converted to Catholicism mostly on political grounds, at best in order to save the Eastern Christian Empire politically by attracting military help from the West, at worst for their personal benefit and privileges. Byzantine and post-Byzantine Unionist theology was in full agreement with the Roman Catholic theology of the period, and it simply repeated Roman Catholic theology and possessed little or no content besides the idea of the full subordination of Eastern Christians to the Pope. Here, the end of these 4 points of neo-patristic interpretation of the Unionist or Henotic intellectual tradition. Despite the appearance of being mutually opposed, both perspectives on Byzantine Unionists, the Roman Catholic neo-scholastic and the Eastern Orthodox neo-patristic, are at their core similar. In both cases, the scholarly position is determined by two assumptions. First, the standpoint of the scholar is regulated by a certain eternal norm, a kind of theologia perennis, the Thomistic in the Roman Catholic case, the Palamite in neo-patristic theology. Compliance with this norm is held to be absolutely necessary to be a true Catholic or a true Orthodox, and any deviation from it is considered detrimental. Secondly, this perennial norm functions ultimately to legitimize the Catholic and the Orthodox denomination, confession of the day. Thus, neo-scholastic and neo-patristic interpretations are opposite in their value judgments, but similar in their content. Both sides see the Unionists as Roman Catholics and as adversaries, even enemies of Eastern Orthodoxy. Exactly this understanding was the reason why in the second half of the 20th century, in the period of the institutionalization of the ecumenical movement and the growth of sympathies towards the Orthodox in the Catholic and Protestant West, research on Byzantine Unionists was almost abandoned. They were held to be fighters for a clearly hopeless cause. Only in the recent 2 decades has the situation begun to change, with such authors like Boris Gudziak, Gerhard Podskalski, Alexandra Riebe, Judith Ryder. These studies avoid denominational grand narratives. They approach unionist figures not from a confessional standpoint, but within the broad panorama of the intellectual and cultural context. This change of paradigm consists at least of 3 aspects. First, these studies question the thesis that the Unionists were agents of Catholicism in the East, alien to genuine Greek or Slavonic ecclesiastical culture. They make an attempt to look at the advocates of union as an indispensable, organic part of the later Byzantine and post-Byzantine intellectual and cultural legacy and its humanistic tendencies. Secondly, these scholars do not agree with the thesis of a purely political motivation for the Byzantine Unionists. Rather, they come to the opposite conclusion. The advocates of union were people who often acted on idealistic grounds, envisioning as their ultimate goal a sweeping reform in their church. Finally, these scholars underscore not only the first of the 2 aspects constituting the Henotic movement, the recognition of papal primacy, but also its second aspect, the plea for diversity in the Christian world. But this is only the beginning of a long overdue turn in the study of the Henotic tradition. Much still has to be done to establish the prosopography of the Unionists and to explore and edit related manuscript sources. But even more important is that the approach of the advocates of union remains to a great extent haunted by confessionalism and denominational terminology. The discourse seems to be determined by anachronistic vocabulary of denominational isms. Scholars of the field should come to the conclusion that the use of the Catholic-Orthodox dichotomy is misleading, if not detrimental, for the study of East-West relations, the history of the Henotic or Unionist tradition, and Eastern Catholic Christianity. In the medieval period, the words Catholicus, Catholicos, and Orthodoxus, Orthodoxos were ecclesiological synonyms, not opposites. In the early modern period, there still existed a salient asymmetry between the system of denominational identities established in the process of confessionalization, the Germans call it Konfessionalisierung, in the West, and the fluid and at times elusive world of Eastern Christianity, or perhaps better, Eastern Christianities in plural. The realities of both periods show that the relations between Western and Eastern Christianity displayed a complex dialectical process that involved tension and conflict on the one hand, as well as interaction, cooperation, and even fusion and synthesis on the other. Even after the formation of the Western confessions in the period from the mid-16th to mid-17th centuries, disagreements, divisions, and clashes were often more pronounced within Eastern Christianity, among its different cultural versions and theological projects, than between Eastern Christianity as a whole and the Western denominations. The process of confessionalization in the East, catalyzed by interaction with Western confessions, began later and lasted longer than in the West. Among the steps that pushed Eastern Christianity towards confessionalization was the establishment of a parallel non-united hierarchy in Ruthenia by Patriarch Theophanes of Jerusalem in 1620. This event split the Ruthenians between the 2 rival Byzantine Rite churches, the united, uniti, and the disunited, disuniti. This in turn led to a radicalization of the conflict that had existed previously between the adherents and adversaries of the Union of Brest of 1596, and it unleashed a real war on the Ukrainian and Belarusian territories that can with good cause be called confessional. In the 1630s, both rival hierarchies were recognized by the Polish-Lithuanian state. Around this time, the word pious, blahochestivy, Greek evsevis, and Orthodox, pravoslavny, pravoverny, from the Greek orthodoxos, came to be preferred as designations for Greek Rite Christians opposed to union with Rome in the Polish-Lithuanian Muscovite contexts. It is from this usage that the name Orthodox as a denominational designation emerged. Later high points on the way to denominational orthodoxy were the Confessions of Orthodox Faith published by Metropolitan Petromohyla and by Patriarch Dositeos of Jerusalem in 1672-1690. The figures of Petromohyla and Dositeos bridge the early modern era and the later Enlightenment period, in which the frontier between the East and the Western confessions became much less fluid and the denominational boundaries much more clear-cut than they had been in the prior periods. The fully established Eastern Orthodox imagined community, to quote the celebrated phrase of Benedict Anderson, appeared in fact no earlier than the late 18th and 19th centuries, with the rise of nationalism, the beginning of the Greek and Slavic fight for independence, and the shaping of the Slavophile movement in the Russian Empire. Thus, it makes sense to speak of a confessionalization lag or protracted confessionalization in respect to Eastern Christianity. To summarize, the confessional dichotomy between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, which confronts us today, means something much more formidable than the meandering maze of clashes and truces, quarrels and reconciliations, disagreements and agreements, enmities and friendships that determined the life of Christians in the medieval and early modern periods. Rather, this denominational dichotomy presupposes a history of systematic state regulation, social disciplining, ideological alliance with political and nationalist agendas, and the building of confessional cultural systems, that very history which became possible only in the modern period and which has received in scholarship the name of the process of confessionalization. Let me conclude by returning to my main point. The case of Byzantine and post-Byzantine advocates of union, unionists or henotics, call them United Eastern Christians, is highly instructive precisely because they do not fit into the clear-cut confessional denominational picture to which we all, including professional historians and theologians, are so accustomed today. By no means were the Unionists converts from Eastern Orthodoxy to Roman Catholicism. Neither of these categories existed in their day. But the advocates of union were indeed Grenzgänger, those who transcended ecclesiastical, political, and cultural boundaries. As such, they were not only caught in the crossfire of religious disputes of their own time, but in effect have remained in the crossfire of diverging, often opposing approaches in modern historical and theological research. In a theological perspective, this fact testifies to one of their foundational features, which I would call ecclesiological liminality. This liminality presents a challenge for church historians who explore their knotty history, for theologians who attempt to make sense of the scandal and folly of their maverick ecclesiological existence, and for contemporary ecumenists who aspire to work with the mutual understanding of the two parts of Eastern Christianity unhappily separated by the militant confessionalism of the modern era. This challenge, however, may mean also discovering new opportunities for a common future in a Christian world no longer torn apart by denominationalism and confessionalism. Thank you.
За вашу
Thank
чудову
you for a great presentation, and thank you for a well-grounded report. Thank you for reminding us that the process of confessionalism and nationalism, which ended in the 18th century, which formed certain idea of church where the unions did not fit, and even writing. Well, when we talk the union of press, we write about the union with Rome and then get a response, well, this subordination, well, in response, so that, well, back at that time, there was this disbalance and misunderstanding. So now the thing is to, well, dispel all those misunderstandings that accumulated over centuries. So thank you for raising all these ideas, and I think we will have time, well, to discuss them later. And we would also like to apologize for some technical problems we had during this meeting. You might not have noticed them on Zoom, but for those who are in the room, they have noticed them. The thing is that we had a power cut and we had to transfer to, power supply from a generator. So we had to switch. This is our reality right now. So we have to adapt. But thank you, Father Yuri. And our next speaker is Professor Oleg Turi, who is the director of the Institute of the History of Church of the Ukrainian Catholic University and the vice rector for foreign relations of the Ukrainian Catholic University. Our present session has this historical aspect, and I remember that Oleg Turi, together with the then Boris Huda, who was not even a priest at the time, they organized the Institute of the History of Church, where they collected all the memories about the church in times of its persecution. And we can say that the Union Church has this memory of the Church of Martyrs, and this is a very important thing for many unit churches, and we can share it with the world. And Oleg Turi will have a speech today on the topic, what unites the unions, the Byzantine Rite Catholics in Central and Eastern Europe. So you're welcome. Well, thank you very much for a very nice introduction. I hope you can hear me well. Good evening, everyone. And I'm here at the UCU campus, and we can hear the bells calling us for the evening sermon. So I have a kind of a accompaniment here, if you can hear it, of course. And I would like to thank all the organizers for the idea of this conference. The topic of identity and of the difference of Eastern Catholics is something that has been raised multiple times. I have participated at various forums, and I'm very happy that I have a chance to speak at this very important forum in the company of, very highly esteemed researchers. And I would like to thank our colleagues from abroad for their solidarity, for their support of Ukraine, of our church, and of our university in conditions of the present-day Russian aggression. Regardless of the situation, we keep working and we keep cooperating, and I really hope that we will be able to meet in person very soon, and that will happen after our joint victory. I will speak Ukrainian, but I prepared the text in English as well to make sure that the interpreters manage well. So I will look into the text from time to time. Because, you know, when a person reads something, it's always faster than when a person speaks. So because it's already quite late, so I'm sorry for quoting a lot. Well, the topic of my today's speech was deliberately formulated in a little bit provocative way. What unites the uniates, Byzantine Rite Catholics in Central and Eastern Europe, challenges and opportunities. But the question itself is very interesting and important. Well, despite all the diversity and the twists that exist in our Eastern European region, is there anything that unites all these churches? And if there is anything like that, what is that? And the first, common trait of the Eastern Catholics is the fact that the institutional existence and the present-day status of these churches is connected with the specific historical unions, thanks to which they actually entered into communion with Rome and became subordinated to that. With the exception of Italo-Albanians, which were also called the Italo-Greeks, so which Professor Marzocchi mentioned in her speech, who never, had a separate union with Rome. So these churches are often also called the Uniate Church or Union churches, as mentioned by Yuri Avakumov and other speakers today. So I'm sorry if I mentioned some ideas which were mentioned before, because, we work with Yuri Avakumov quite closely together, but we prepared separate speeches. On the post-Soviet territory, the term uniates or the uniate church has a negative connotation. The decades of Soviet indoctrination and propaganda, and also the direct repressions and persecutions, which were preceded by the several centuries of similar Russian imperialist policy, actually made the word union or uniate gain this negative connotation. Unitism as a form, as a method of achieving church unity, is also mentioned in the documents of the current official Catholic Orthodox dialect. Well, eventually, unitism is important, but only one aspect of identity of Eastern Catholic churches. Similarly, like the Catholic Church is erroneously called Papist, although some people do call it all that. Well, despite the fact, that the work and the ministry of Roman Pontiff is one of the principal characteristics of this church. Well, to understand the real meaning of the church unions, so we need to make at least a brief overview of their historical context, because that will be help us understand the circumstances and the consequences of these unions. And in this regard, we have to remember that the territory of the Central and Eastern Europe is a kind of a borderline territory, kind of a religious frontier, as it is quite popular saying right now. So it was the territory where the impacts of the Christian East and West competed with each other, and the differences between different Christian traditions often took the forms of prolonged conflicts, or sometimes prompted to develop the plans and make attempts at reconciliation. And we may mention here the missionary activities of Saint Cyril and Methodius, and also, the mission to Kiev of German Bishop Adalbert. The Kiev Church adopted the Byzantine Rite in its Slavic form, and the superiority of Second Rome. All these, despite the fact that they remained open to the context with the First Rome and the Christian West. Considering these peculiarities of geopolitical situation, especially of Ukraine, there were some initiatives which were aimed at supporting and restoring Christian unity, or even at, starting the initiatives for such a restoration of union. We may mentioned the Western Church Councils in Lyon and Constance. The Halachina Prince Danilo, seeking assistance of his struggle against Mongols, concluding a treaty with the Holy See and receive a royal crown from Pope Innocent IV. And follow the reception can be mentioned in terms of Ukrainian and Belarusian lands, and their connection with the Union in Florence of 1439. Well, after signing, along with the representatives of other Byzantine patriarchs, the Act of Union on the way to his Metropolitan See, which was then in Moscow, Isidore stopped in Budapest, where he issued a message addressed to all who bear Christian name, both Latins and Greeks, and all all those who belong to the conciliar church of Constantinople, that is Rusins, Serbs, Wallachians, and other Christian races. End of the quote. In this message, he called upon these churches of our region, who were not very widely represented at this meeting, to actually accept the sacred and holy union with great spiritual joy and honor, and to mutually recognize the validity of sacraments. So this was probably the first case in history when special attention was paid to Byzantine Christians beyond Byzantium in the region where Uniate or Greek Catholic churches would later emerge. So we can see that in this quote, we can find this chance and attempt to unite those Christians in the territories where later Uniate or Greek Catholic churches appear. Another fact connected with the Union of Florence is its rejection, and this was the reason of the final separation of the Moscow Church from the ancient Canaanite Metropolitanate and, well, its break with Constantinople. So in 1448, it got its autocephaly, and in 1589, taking advantage of the decline of the Greek Orthodoxy under the Ottoman rule, they achieved the status of a patriarchate, and this only boosted the imperial ambitions of Moscow rulers and their claims regarding the leading role of the Third Rome in the world of Orthodoxy. So the respective rhetorics could be considered the constitutive element of the Russian Orthodox ecclesiastical consciousness, and it is preserved like that until today, and is now expressed in the concept of the Orthodox civilization and the Russian space, or the Russian world, that is opposed to the hostile and decadent West. Well, the Council of Florence was the last attempt to hold an all-church dialogue and to make a conciliar act of concord between the Christians of East and the West, mainly, well, the Byzantium and Eastern parts. And, well, its failure due to the resistance of Moscow and the policy of the Ottomans, who by the middle of the 15th century controlled a large part of the Byzantine Christian world, well, combined with the new challenges of the Protestant Reformation, well, caused the changes in the understanding of the church unity, and subordination to the Roman pontiff began to be viewed as the main condition of belonging to the Church of Christ at all, and therefore as a prerequisite for salvation. And as a result, the idea of a universal union, which still exists, was transformed into the practice of particular unions with those who express their willingness. In contrast, in Christian East, especially beyond the Ottoman Empire, the idea of unity in diversity and equality of different ecclesial traditions still continued its existence. The first is the role of local or regional unions, where there was this clash of these two visions. So was the union of the Kievan Church with the Roman Church at the end of the 16th century, which is known as the Union of Brest-Litovsk. Well, according to the research, the initiative came from the bishops of the Kievan Church, who were the subjects of the Polish-Lithuanian Republic, but remained under the canonical jurisdiction of Constantinople. So having had these long discussions, the bishops took a synodal decision to transfer to the supreme authority of Rome, and they wanted to preserve the Eastern Rite and their ecclesiastical ethnocultural authenticity and civil rights. It is important that the bishops appealed to the initial unity, and they will actually referred to the fact of the Florentine Union, even though they were aware of the existence of dogmatic differences. What is interesting, the reason of these differences, they believed to be that we do not want to understand each other, and that's why they asked Rome not to impose upon them a new confession of faith and not to force them to adopt Latin ritual practices, not because they're worse, but because they had their own ways of venerating the holy sacraments. What is more, their decision to restore the unity with Rome was interpreted as the first step to the universal union of all Greeks and Romans, and the preservation of their own tradition under the authority of Rome was considered the best argument for this, for those who are still hesitant to join this union. Well, the documents show that in Rome, Warsaw, and Vilnius, in accordance with the post-Tridentine ecclesiology, the union was not viewed as a unification of two churches, but as a conversion and reconciliation of the Ruthenian bishops with the Catholic Church. The officials of the Roman Curia refused to sign any documents that could be seen as a deal, although the Ruthenian bishops were granted everything they were promised. So this Christian unity, adopted at the Synod in Brest, which gave birth to the institutional existence of the Uniate, or the present-day Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine and Belarus, was supported not by all hierarchs of the then Kyiv Metropolia. Some of them were dissatisfied with the vision of this union and insisted on canonical belonging to the Patriarchate and subordination to the Patriarchate of Constantinople. So they had their own parallel hierarchy ordained, that was 1620, which was later recognized by the Polish-Lithuanian government in 1632. And this led to the confessional division of the Ruthenian Church into two jurisdictions, and the split of the Ukrainian Belarus society into two opposing camps. And this division remains a painful wound until now. At the same time, the conflicts and theological discussions of early 17th century generated a great response to the challenge of the schisms between the supporters of the Unia and its opponents. The idea of uniting the Rus with the Rus, which was formulated by Malarius Smotritsky and supported by Peter Mohyla. Creation of the joint patriarchate, which should be recognized both by Rome and by Constantinople and by other Eastern patriarchates. Well, the main promoter of this idea was the fact that the Uniates and the Orthodox, and I use these terms in brackets as well, there have no differences in faith, but the obstinacy of the Roman Curia, which demanded that the Orthodox schismatics repent and accept the Tridentine confession, as well as the growth between social and political tensions in the Polish-Lithuanian state, prevented these plans from realization. Well, but other unions also had very unfortunate fate. The Roman dictate and suspicions regarding the validity of Eastern sacraments and ordinations, then church splits and prolonged confrontations, they all accompanied other church unions. I would like to mention just a couple of them. In 1611, the Union of March on the territory of Croatia, that they involved Serbian frontier settlers. In 1464, there was a part of the clergy in Mukachevo eparchy who was submitted to Rome through the Union of Uzhgorod, but then it was defended by the local bishops. In 1700, Romanians of Transylvania entered the Union of Alba Giulia. Well, all these following unions did not solve one of the main problems in relations between the Eastern and Western Christians and the Central and Eastern Europe. That was the problem of their legal and ecclesiastical equality with Roman Catholics. Well, in particular, in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Union Metropolitan and his bishops never got the promised seats in the Polish parliament. And the clergy and their churches remained in official use. Well, the same was the Orthodox. They faced continuous discrimination and humiliation in their everyday life. The nobility and educated persons were still encouraged to convert to the correct Catholic Church through the Latin Rite. And the main reason for this was the growing conviction of the Roman Catholic and the exclusive correctness of their theology and the undeniable superiority of their rite as a better and more secure means of salvation. As a result of such an attitude, there was the unconditional adoption of Roman Catholic dogmatics and virtual absence of independent theological schools, as well as progressive Latinization of the church life and the whole culture of the Eastern Christian tradition of unit churches. Well, another important factor and important fact for the change of the character of relations between the characters of different, churches of different traditions was the Halashina, after the first division of Poland and the Halashina, when Halashina became the part of the Habsburg monarchy in 1772, the religious policy of the rulers became an important factor. The Greek and Catholic Church, as it became called during the time of Maria Theresia, because of their Greek rite and subordination to Rome, was actually supported by the government, and they were formally they enjoyed formal recognition and support of their rights. It's the same rights as Roman Catholics, and these seminaries were founded in Vienna and in Lviv, and there were some other welfare of the clergy guarantees. What is important is also the church and administrative structures. For example, in 1771, the independence of the Mukachevo eparchy was asserted, and then in 1881, a new Prussia eparchy was created. Also, there was a Prussia eparchy in Croatia, and then Halachina Metropolia was restored in Lviv, and a similar one was also established in Romania with a center in Blash. That was 1853. All these reforms actually instilled the principles of respect, and especially, we should especially stress that following their pragmatic interests and the ideas of common good and justice, the Catholic leaders of Austria acted contrary to the existing doctrine of that time, Prestantia Litus Latini. Maria Theresia, in response to the Latin Archbishop of Lviv to subordinate the Galician unions to his authority, said she would not tolerate their abasement, implying that previously the units were mistreated. And her son, Joseph II, called Roman, Greek, and Armenian Catholics three daughters of one mother, which bear striking resemblance with the modern Catholic concept of sister churches officially adopted after the Second Vatican Council. Having emancipated the Greek Catholics from the Latin dominion, the Habsburg government began to nurture a plan of their unification in a single church structure. I'm not going to draw any examples here, but this idea, we are talking here about the idea of creating a single Greek and Catholic patriarchate within the Austrian Empire, which was even reinforced after the liquidation of this church in 1839 in Russia. However, this idea was never implemented. And on the other hand, the attempts of the Austrian authorities to actually change the light of the Greek Catholics, the implementation of church and involvement of church into the state life actually made them a part of the cultural, national, and political movement. And this last factor became probably one of the most important factors of the fall of the empire itself and the appearance of the national states, but also the changes in Greek Catholic churches, which became more and more nationalized in Romania, in Halachina, in Transcarpathia, or assimilation with the existing allied as it happens in Slovakia and Hungary. Paradoxically, this fragmentation of Greek Catholics was supported by the position of the Vatican. Vatican should have been interested in more centralized church, but as we know, at the end of the 19th century and the 20s and 30s of the 20th century, Vatican often used the disparities and discrepancies between the national churches and even within the local metropolis and even eparchies, realizing the policy divide et conquer this way and strengthening its power this way. Well, another thing, and this is a tragic and a dramatic factor, impacting the destiny of most Greek Catholics of Europe in the 20th century, and that is the repressive policy of the communist regimes. Well, according to the plans developed by the Soviet Security Service and approved by Stalin himself, the church union was to be liquidated through the so-called reunification, a forced reunification. So again, another union of the unions with the Orthodox Church, which happened first in Halachina in 1946 and then in the Transcarpathia in 1949. And quite ironically, this idea of reunification was borrowed from the Tsarist government, who used a similar scenario to eradicate the Greek Catholics in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. But regardless of this, the Greek Catholics managed to retain their faith, remaining one of the big structures to resist the communist regime. So they existed, they lived in prisons, in exile, in underground, and they actually facilitated the democratization of their communities. And when we talk about Ukraine, so they actually helped Ukraine regain its independence. So getting this freedom was accompanied by some conflicts in the regions of Central and Eastern Europe, because that had impact on the domestic political situation and the international situation. About 30 years ago, this church in the USSR, in Slovak or Romanian republics was non-existent, and its fate looked like it has been resolved forever. But as a result, these countries ceased to exist. These political regimes which tried to liquidate the Union Church ceased to exist. However, even today, some people believe that the very existence of the Greek Catholic Church is a historical mistake or a failed experiment and the main obstacle for the triumph of orthodoxy or making or the ecumenism. In particular, the leadership of the Moscow Patriarchate believes that the legalization of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was an act of the Vatican aggression and of the polysemitism on Moscow's canonical territory. And even though the Eastern Rite communities in Halachina and Transcarpathia historically never belonged to the Russian Church and were subjected to it in the 20th century, not through missionary efforts, but through the will of the Soviet government. I'm not going to draw any other arguments. We all see that even when we look at the present day war, this is anti-Western and anti-unionist rhetoric is being used and used for the purpose of manipulations. And today, Moscow uses this rhetoric to spread its ideology of this Russian space or Russian world, which I have already mentioned, on the post-Soviet territories. And there is also a lot of skepticism to the unions when we talk about the Catholic environment. So they see sometimes the unitism as a kind of a intermediary step. But now these ideas did not take the test of time, and they're condemned by both Catholics and unions. And the church themselves managed to pass through all the ordeals and all the challenges to withstand and to prove that they managed to preserve both their identity of Eastern Christianity and their jurisdictional unity with the Roman See and the Eucharistic communion with the Latin Rite Catholics, although the price was the blood of thousands of martyrs, both known by name and unknown. So to conclude, I would like to try and offer my own summary answer to the question raised in the title of this lecture. Well, I believe that the present-day Greek Catholics, are a challenge for our confessionally divided world, but at the same time, the Unionists represent an opportunity and a prospect for Christianity in the age that we call postmodern, post-communist, post-atheistic. And we hope that we will also be able to say it's post-Putin and post-war, so that this Christianity becomes post-confessional. But their existence, the Byzantine Catholics witness that the unity in diversity is possible and real. Thank you for your attention.
Це вже сьогодні прозвучали спільні моменти в кількох доповідях.
Thank you, Oleg, because we have some common points in several speeches already, because we talk about these Eastern Catholics, about this bipolar world which is being divided. We have this division between Western and Eastern Christianity. It is a unique phenomenon, and potentially they can foster a dialogue, they can facilitate the unity, but only when we have some proper attitude towards them, when they are not treated as an obstacle. And there is another point which we heard in the second speech of today. The very emergence of Eastern churches in very many cases does not go in line to the scheme of unitism which we have in the Bellament document, because it is treated as aggression coming from the stronger church. Here we're talking about Roman Church, which in some difficult historical period for its Western sister grabs some parts of it and tries to link them to itself. That is why the emergence of Eastern churches is seen as aggression coming from Rome, and you and other professors also highlighted that the very conclusion of union when talking about Albanian Catholic Church and Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, it was not a result of Roman aggression. That was the grassroots initiative of bishops. And when I talk about all those unions which were assigned by Eastern churches, I think that there is no single document which would abide by this general scheme which is outlined in the Bellament document. And generally, when we talk about Orthodox churches in that turn, they did some things when in some difficult historical periods, they grabbed some parts from other churches, even Orthodox churches. And this is how they did with Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and other churches in Europe. So such actions, which are part of this classical definition of unitism. And right now we have the very final presentation for today. So I want to invite Basilius Gruan. I really ask you to be very laconic, because we're a little bit behind with our agenda. Professor Bert Gruan, he is the head of Eastern Catholic Studies, Radboud University, and since 2002 to 2018, he was a professor of liturgy. Also, he worked for Graz University, and he had very many positions, and we don't have enough time to list all of them because of all the credentials and academic accomplishments and his background. Right now, he will deliver his speech. Yeah, so the topic of this speech is the conciliar concept of tradition and the idea of ecclesial identity. So dear professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me clearly? Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. We have been praying for you, and you are in our thoughts in Lviv, in Ukraine. We do what we can in the field of charity, in material aid. My wife is Polish. She understands Ukrainian very well. She acts as an interpreter for the Ukrainian refugees, of whom we have many here in Austria, also here in Graz. So our thoughts and our prayers are with you. And thank you again for the invitation. What I would like to do now is speak about the conciliar concept of tradition, such a key concept, and the idea of ecclesial identity. Regarding the liturgical traditions of the Eastern Catholic Churches, the first constitution of the Second Vatican Council has much to say. I quote, "In faithful obedience to tradition, the Holy Mother Church holds all lawfully acknowledged rights to be of equal right and dignity, that she wishes to preserve them in the future and to foster them in every way. The Council also desires that, where necessary, the rights be revised carefully in the light of sound tradition, and that they be given new vigor to meet the circumstances and needs of modern times." End quote. Hence, all Eastern rites are just as valuable as the Roman one. So the idea of the Prestantia Ritus Latini definitely no longer prevails, and revision and innovation are mandatory. The call for aggiornamento is heard immediately at the outset of the Constitution, when the goals of the Council are defined, I quote, "to adapt more suitably to the needs of our own times those institutions which are subject to change, to foster whatever can promote union among all who believe in Christ." The Council therefore sees particularly cogent reasons for undertaking the reform and promotion of the liturgy. End quote. Although most specific regulations of the liturgical reform apply only to the Roman Rite, the fundamental principles of the Constitution hold also true of Eastern Catholicism. Let me name these points of departure, general departure, that are also apply to the Eastern Catholic Churches. One, the preeminent position of the Paschal Mystery, the commemorative celebration of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, the gift of the Holy Spirit, and the expectation of the second coming. Two, the central meaning of the Eucharist and other sacraments for Christian life. Three, Christ's enduring presence in worship. Four, earthly worship as a prefiguration of the heavenly liturgy. Five, despite the seminal importance of catechesis and charity on the one hand, and personal prayer and spirituality on the other, liturgy is the summit and the font of being the church. Six, enabling all faithful to full, conscious, and active participation, to which, by virtue of their baptism, the entire Christian people have a right and a duty. Seven, the faithful's active singing, acclaiming, and so on during the service. Eight, the pivotal significance of liturgical formation for all, not only clergy, laity as well. Nine, the crucial role of Holy Scripture, the source of the readings, orations, and chants. 10. The relevance of the sermon and the precedence of the Sunday. 11. The necessity that the texts and rituals express the holy mystery more clearly, be simple, and thus facilitate the participants' understanding. 12. The use of the vernacular language for a better comprehension. 13. The importance of sacred music and art, as well as of reverent silence. 14. The priority of community celebrations to private ones. 15. The legitimate variety and adaptation to regional customs. 16. The revision of the service books according to the principles of the Constitution. Germane for Eastern Catholics is also the regulation that the holy images be venerated, and that their number should be moderate, and their relative positions should reflect right order, end quote. Lest confusion, as the Council says, and a devotion of doubtful orthodoxy occur. Finally, the Council has declared itself unopposed to celebrating Easter on a fixed Sunday in the Gregorian calendar, provided that all those concerned, in particular the non-Catholic Christian communities, agree, which, as we know, has not happened. The longing for full conscious and active participation of all those in attendance, including the promotion of the vernacular languages, is not to be confused with activism. It is God who is inviting, and it is Christ who is celebrating. The theological reason for the reform is not any kind of shallow modernism, but a concern that all faithful experience and celebrate the nucleus of the Christian faith, God's love of humankind, Christ's self-giving, and the gift of the Holy Spirit, so that all believers can live the mystery of faith in their own circumstances, here and now. On the one hand, the reform outlined in the Constitution on the Liturgy aims at retaining the sound tradition, we heard it, sana traditio. On the other, it wishes the way to remain open to legitimate progress. The Constitution underscores the significance of careful investigations, theological, historical, pastoral ones, before any revision, as well as the general laws governing the structure and meaning of the liturgy, and the experience derived from recent liturgical reforms. The Constitution champions innovation, but only if the good of the Church requires it. In addition, I quote again, any new forms adopted should in some way grow organically from forms already existing, end quote. Moreover, notable differences between the rites used in adjacent regions must be carefully avoided. It seems to me that the sentence about the organic growth of new forms from shapes which already exist is equivocal, since the question may be asked whether real innovation is possible if it has to be congruent with the old element. Opponents of the full-scale reform initiated by the Council have referred to this passage repeatedly, with the purpose to substantiate their criticism. However, I shall not discuss here the reception and the implementation of the reforms. Suffice it to say that after the Council, the everyday diocesan liturgical pastoral reality overtook some conciliar decisions, notably regarding language. Although the Constitution stipulated with respect to the Roman Rite that parts of the Mass continue to be celebrated in Latin, it proved from a pastoral perspective difficult to always use both Latin and the vernacular in one and the same celebration. And soon permission was given to employ the vernacular on a regular basis. Pope Paul VI was the first to celebrate the entire Mass in Italian in Rome. Also, according to the decree on the Eastern Catholic Churches, all rites are of equal dignity, and I quote, all members of the Eastern Rite should know and be convinced that they can and should always preserve their legitimate liturgical rite and their established way of life, and that these may not be altered except to obtain for themselves an organic improvement. Here we have the same expression again, organic. And if in their regard they have fallen short owing to contingencies of times and persons, they should take steps to return to their ancestral traditions. A key expression, ad avitas traditiones redire satagant. The final words bear resemblance to a passage in Sacrosanctum Concilium. I quote again. Other elements which have suffered injury through accidents of history are now to be restored to the vigor which they had in the days of the Holy Fathers, ad pristinam sanctorum patrum normam, as may seem useful or necessary, end quote. Furthermore, the leadership of any Eastern Catholic Church is entitled to regulate issues pertaining to liturgical language, including the approval of vernacular texts, provided that the Apostolic See is informed. Thus, interestingly, with respect to the use of the vernacular in worship, more autonomy is given to the Eastern Catholic rites than to the Roman one, in which the Apostolic See has an explicit right to approve, that is, to confirm the translations from Latin into the vernacular. As later developments have proved, this right has often been enforced and extended, and it is only during the office of Pope Francis that it has been properly restored to the bishops' conferences themselves. The 16 conciliar documents must be considered as a whole. That is, we cannot limit our subject to Sacrosanctum Concilium and Orientalium Ecclesiarum, but we should also account for Lumen Gentium, Dei Verbum, Gaudium et Spes, and other documents. The dogmatic constitution on the Church, for example, highlights the entire people of God as it navigates its way, as well as the common and royal priesthood of all faithful. The two priesthoods, the common one and the ministerial one, are interrelated. Both of them participate in Christ's priesthood, and although in different ways, in the Eucharist, the other sacraments, and Christian life. The dogmatic constitution on divine revelation stresses the key position of Holy Scripture and equates the veneration of the Bible with that of the Eucharistic species. I quote, "The Church has always venerated the divine Scriptures, just as she venerates the body of the Lord, since especially in the sacred liturgy, she unceasingly receives and offers to the faithful the bread of life from the table, both of God's word and of Christ's body." The decree on ecumenism highly esteems the liturgical, spiritual, disciplinary, and theological treasures of the Eastern non-Catholic churches, and warmly recommends innovation, prayer, mutual understanding, ecumenical formation, and dialogue. Concurrently, this decree rejoices that many Easterners already participate in the full community of the Catholic Church, and that their liturgical, spiritual, theological, and disciplinary legacy belongs to the Catholicity and Apostolicity of the Church. Just as in Orientalium Ecclesiarum, also Unitatis Redintegratio encourages to a certain extent communicatio in sacris with the Orthodox churches, which have preserved true sacraments, including the Eucharist and the priesthood. The conversion of the Catholic Church to ecumenism has resulted in multiple forms of dialogue, which is now a fundamental dimension of ecclesial life, pervading, ideally, all its domains, also, therefore, its liturgical and theological research. Furthermore, the decree on the relation of the Church to the non-Christian religions emphasizes, inter alia, its high respect for and the common ties with Judaism. This could not remain without consequences for various anti-Jewish statements, especially during Holy Week, as the subsequent fundamental revision in both the Roman Rite and in a variety of Eastern rites has made clear. The revelation to Israel has not been revoked at Christ's manifestation, but was extended throughout the world. The God of Israel, who appeared to his people and all nations, appears to the world in Jesus and still manifests himself today. God acts in Jesus Christ without invalidating the Jewish tradition. The Son of God himself, the Mother of God Mary, and the apostles had Semitic faces. Finally, of course, my list is incomplete. The pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world outlines the necessity for the entire Catholic Church to discern the signs of the times and act in present-day society. I quote, "The Church has always had the duty of scrutinizing the signs of the times and of interpreting them in the light of the gospel. Thus, in language intelligible to each generation, she can respond to the perennial questions which people ask about this present life and the life to come, and about the relationship of the one to the other. We must therefore recognize and understand the world in which we live, its explanations, its longings, and its often dramatic characteristics." End quote. This makes clear that according to the Council, Catholic faith and celebrating the liturgy on the one hand, and becoming open-minded for the world in which we live on the other, should be interconnected. In other words, the entanglement of the lex orandi and the lex credendi must be joined with the lex agendi. Not only the way how we pray and celebrate defines our faith, but these two laws determine the way of action, and vice versa. The right way of doing things lays down the correct way of worshiping and believing. Doxological and liturgical theology should not be isolated from other essential aspects of Christian life, especially charity. As the Romanian Orthodox theologian Ion Bria held, there's also the liturgy after the liturgy, and may I add, the liturgy before the liturgy. Pope Francis is setting numerous examples in this respect, both in his daily behavior and in his addresses and encyclicals. Liturgical innovation makes an impact on ecclesial identity. Yet identity is not a static entity, but a dynamic one. The Christian faith community is not tantamount to a standstill, but moves towards the fullness in its Lord. And this happens in a diversity of forms. Identity is multifarious, Also the Byzantine, the Roman, and other Catholic rites demonstrate that they are products of blending. Throughout the history of worship, sacred music, and sacred art, we meet with the fascinating phenomenon of crossing boundaries. Cross-fertilization is normal. The Byzantine rite has incorporated many elements that came into existence elsewhere, particularly in Jerusalem. Not only there, it also adopted and adjusted various ceremonies of the imperial court. Besides of its ability to integrate heterogeneous elements and thus produce a new synthesis, one may speak of the Byzantine synthesis, an expression of the Orthodox theologian Alexander Schmemann and the Eastern Catholic liturgist Robert Taft. The same applies to the Roman rite, which has incorporated a host of elements from the Frankish, Germanic, Gallican, and the Byzantine traditions. There exists neither a pure Byzantine rite nor a pure Roman rite. All the more so because ancient polytheistic orations have also had a great effect on both rites. Once the veneration of the Olympic gods and other gods and goddesses had nearly vanished, in both the Greek and the Latin worlds, it became more acceptable to adopt basic patterns of the pagan prayer language. This concerns the way how God is addressed, the prayer terminology, rhetoric style characteristics. Moreover, also in later periods, the two syntheses have not remained unchangeable, but they have undergone continuous alteration. And this is also true today. Unlike what some people, also in the Western world, think or wish, the Byzantine and other Eastern Catholic forms of worship are not static, but dynamic and still subject to change. This is a natural process. Life means change, and change means life. Most of us, actually our civilization in its own right, are marked by elements of several identities. This is not only true of music, literature, visual art, and the international kitchen, but it concerns Christianity and its theology too. A personal example, I studied Catholic theology in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. Then I went into Protestant divinity in Amsterdam. And subsequently, I examined Orthodox theology in Thessalonica. Because of my nearly lifelong engagement with the ecumenical movement, I'm familiar with the diversity of Christian denominations. To the end. An eye-catching contemporary controversy in the West, particularly, concerns the so-called cultural appropriation. Some critics deem it unacceptable that Western artists and writers make use of objects, symbols, and terminology which belong to the cultural traditions of the indigenous peoples of Africa, America, and Asia, whom the Europeans have colonized. The polemic in point is legitimate as it touches on the issues of respect, equality, and doing justice to other cultures. Yet at the same time, it seems to me that a number of stern decriers overlook the fact that intercultural blending is an inevitable part of social life, also on a global scale. Crossing boundaries is normal. Different cultures, also different ecclesial cultures, unavoidably contribute to our identities. The pertinent argument should, in my view, be less about illicitness and prohibition as about sensitizing students and others to both the bright sides and the drawbacks of the process. Why do I tell this? Mutatis mutandis, this applies to the theme of this conference. Certainly, where oppression and violence have led to the disappearance of authentic elements in Eastern Catholicism and its liturgies, restoration is an advisable option. Yet, there have also been conspicuous cases of auto-Latinization, self-Latinization, an expression of the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic liturgy Peter Galatza. And as I've just indicated, pure forms of liturgical worship in the range of the Eastern Catholic churches as well in the West are non-existent. Finally, tradition is an energetic process. This applies also to the ancestral traditions, to which the decree on the Eastern Catholic churches refers. Just as its Greek equivalent, paradosis, also traditio is an active process, not identical with the passive concepts of paradoton, Greek, and traditum, Latin. Remaining loyal to the spirit of the ancient heritage, not slavishly copying the past, but living in Pauline freedom and celebrating the faith in today's world, both paradosis and traditio imply that consideration of the signs of the times, adaptation and innovation are normal and often required. The adage, tradition does not consist in veneration of the burnt ashes, but in passing on the flame, ascribed to St. Thomas More, a Catholic saint, and also to several other luminaries, may inspire us on our journey. Thank you very much.
Дякую, професору Грен, за
Thank you, Professor Grenza, for your opinions about liturgy, about the update of the liturgical life. And we know that the Catholic churches, they are very sensitive to all matters related to liturgy. And well, living in the colonial circumstances, being the colonies of large states, many Latin practices have penetrated into the practices and rites of the Eastern Catholic churches, but this process of de-Latinization is very sensitive, and it's very good that we have the documents of the Second Vatican Council, but we will also talk about it tomorrow at our panel, which will which will start at 1 p.m. and we will discuss about this liturgical aspect and how the Eastern Catholic churches can speak of their liturgical tradition and how they can become more modern by remaining faithful to the things we have adopted. So thank you for raising these issues. And I'm told that we don't have enough time to hold a discussion right now, so I suggest that each of our speakers sums up their speech in 1 minute, pointing out the most important things that you would like the audience to take with them. And I would like to remind you that our conference today and tomorrow, the materials of our today's and tomorrow's conference will be published on the website of our institute. And I would also like to remind you that tomorrow we should have time for a discussion. Our tomorrow's conference will start at 1 p.m. Kyiv time, and we will be speaking about the liturgical aspects of the Eastern Catholic churches. And then the third panel will be dedicated to the ecclesiological and canonical matters, and it will start at 3:30 p.m. Kyiv time. So now I would like to ask the speakers, starting from Professor Allen, to summarize your call. So what would you like to the audience to leave with?
Yes, thank you very much. I was cut off actually, and I wasn't able to give my last 2 minutes of my conclusion. So I will just read it very quickly. It's about 2 minutes. Returning then to the original question regarding whether the Eastern Catholic churches can speak with one voice, and to the role of the university in such a challenge, I suggest that although there are some 25 sui juris churches accounting for some 18 million people worldwide, it is really up to 3 of these churches to lead the way, namely the Syro-Maronite Church, the Syro-Malabar Church, and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Not only are these churches strategically located in terms of geography and cultural heritage, but these also make up the vast majority of Eastern Catholics in the world, with about 5 million belonging to each of these churches respectively. What is more, each of these sui juris churches have vibrant universities, which, if united, not only increases the chance of assuring that the Eastern Catholic churches speak with one enlightened, informed, intelligent, and committed voice, but also have the potential of strengthening the unity between faith and reason, which today is undermined by powerful trends in many Western Catholic universities, by secularism and new forms of materialism and transhumanism. These challenges also exist in the East, of course, but the Eastern Catholic Church, in my judgment, are in better position culturally and historically to deal with these threats. Today, Notre Dame University in Lebanon and Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv have a 10-year history of cooperation and a formal agreement which can provide a kind of working model for a larger syndicate. This solid foundation is something practical to build upon, especially because one of our common themes has been integral human development. Once again, although the foundation must be spiritual and rooted in a meaningful ecclesiology that revolves around the Trinitarian mystery and the call to divinization, so often highlighted in the theology and spirituality of the Eastern Catholic churches, it is here. It must be presented in relation to reason, to nature, and to the concrete world. It is here that the university must play a central role, a universe of studies, a study of the universe, a place where the age-old ontological problem of the relation of the one to the many, of immutability to change, of unity to diversity, of being to time and history, is held just in the right balance. And if it is, the queen of the sciences, theology, and her worthy handmaiden philosophy are given their rightful places. We cannot underestimate just how important the revelation of the mystery of the Holy Trinity was and still is in shedding light on this most central and perennial philosophical problem, and not just for metaphysics, but for all the arts and sciences and for all moral and intellectual life in general. I would like to conclude this brief address by congratulating the Institute of Ecumenical Studies at UCO for organizing such an important international conference on the question of the unity of the Eastern Catholic Churches, which, as I have understood, is the first of 3 international conferences. Both the second theme, scheduled for 2023, Ecumenical Mission of the Eastern Catholics, the Eastern Catholic Church's role in the context of the Catholic Orthodox Oriental dialogue, and the third theme, scheduled for 2024, the place of Eastern Catholic churches in the communio ecclesiarium and their relation with the Roman Catholic Church, are also extremely important and timely, and I hope to be involved in these meetings in any way that may be fruitful. Thank you very much.
Планую бути в Лівані. Дуже сподіваюся з вами.
I plan to be in Lebanon in a couple of days, so I hope to meet you in person. And I would like to give the floor to Ines Morzakul. You have 1 minute to summarize what you would like the viewers to take with them. Unfortunately, she's not with us, so let's pass the mic to you, Father Beauty Avakumo. So your conclusions. Thank you. I just would like to say that it seems to me that a real theological, intellectual, and cultural potential of the Eastern Catholic churches remains not well known enough in the world, and we have to work on making it known. There's no doubt that the Eastern Catholic tradition has extremely interesting and important and profound aspects which the whole Christian world, and probably not even beyond the Christian world, can use. And I think that there are some signs, as I've already mentioned at the beginning, that there is a growing interest to us. I've been witnessing certain initiatives of the seminariums, dedicated to this topic, and I would like to use this opportunity to very briefly announce that there's a new publishing series, Eastern Catholic Studies and Texts, with the CU Press. So we have initiated this series of publications, and the participants and panelists and attendees of this conference include two colleagues of mine. This is Professor Alam and Professor Turish, who also are a part of our editorial board of this series of publications. And using this opportunity, I would like to invite, from my whole heart, very sincerely, I would like to invite potential authors, both from Ukraine and from around the world, people who work in the area of researching the history of relations between Eastern churches and the Roman Catholic Church, those who study the history of Eastern Catholic churches. You can publish the results of your research in the series of publications.
Now in English, a new editorial, a new publishing series has been begun recently with the Catholic University of America Press. The title of this series is Eastern Catholic Studies and Texts. And I would like to use this opportunity to invite all potential authors who would be interested to publish with this publisher, which is a good publisher. They publish things really quickly and well. So I invite everyone who might be interested to publish her or his study with our series. Дякую дуже іще раз за
Thank you very much for your invitation and for the possibility to participate in this conference. Thank you, Father Yuri. Oleg, would you like to tell our audience something about this publishing series, which was initiated by the Ukrainian Catholic University on Kyiv Christianity, where there are many interesting research findings? Well, first of all, I would like to thank Father Yuri for the announcements of the series, which is of international importance. And obviously, Ukrainian publications are more for domestic use, but I would also like to talk about other things. Because I have received many words of gratitude for my report and also a question, and I promise to answer this question, especially considering the fact that it allows me to say something very important. The question was whether, in my opinion, the ecumenical dialogue, who should play the most important role in the ecumenical dialogue, be those the faithful or, the functionaries of the church? And I thought of the words of Lyubomir Huzar, who, talking about the dissent and the conflicts and misunderstandings, he said that the Christians are not divided into Christians, Greek Catholics, Catholics, and so on. They are divided into those who want the unity and those who don't. And I think that both the hierarchs of the church and also the lay people include both the ones and the others as well, I know his Beatitude Lubomir, who actually emanated this wish for unity. And I think that conferences like this actually exist to remind us about the mission of the Eastern Catholic churches. Father Yuri spoke about the richness of our traditions, and I would like to stress that where we as Greek Catholics, we should remember about our mission and we should commit to following it. And I would like to also ask Bart Grön to well, say a couple of words. Professor Grön?
Well, there are Eastern minutes and Western minutes. I will try to remain within 1 minute. I have only 3 points, and that is, if we speak about the Second Vatican Council, we need to take the entire picture into account. So we should not isolate Sacrosanctum Concilium and Orientatis, but also take the other texts, and they belong together. Point 2 is tradition is an active concept, and it gives a lot of room for change. 3, identity is a very dynamic concept. And I know that in Eastern Catholicism, and not only there, of course, the issue of identity is a hotly debated subject. For me personally, it makes room to realize that we are all in a certain way the products of blending, and that we have many identities in ourselves, which does not mean that everything is the same and so on, not at all. But my objective was to show that we do not only have one identity, but often many more. Thank you very much. And Oleg, pozdrawianki od Grazu dla ciebie. Many greetings from Graz for you.
Dankeschön, ist wirklich sehr gut, dir wieder zu sehen. Schon lange her. Bis bald.
Події були надзвичайно цікавими. Як вже сказав отець Роман, ми зможемо їх...
Father Roman mentioned, after the whole series, we will manage to publish the materials. And another thing, to those who attended our conference and who were here online and offline, despite that it's already cold, they still remain until the end. So I would like to invite you all to this next session and our next panel. So we will have 2 panels tomorrow. And I would also like to thank the whole team which provided technical support to us. So they did wonders to make sure that we keep working despite all the technical difficulties. So there was a lot of hard work at the backstage, so to say, and I would also like to thank for the interpretation. I think that our interpreters might be already very tired because of the amount of the materials delivered and also the deep theological concepts they had to deal with today. So thank you all, and we hope to see you tomorrow. And I would also like to give the mic to Reverend Ivan Scott to finish our conference with prayer.
В ім'я Отця і Сина, і Святого Духа, амінь. Достойно є воістину величати блаженною тебе, Богородицю, пресноблаженну і пренепорочну, і матір Бога нашого, чеснішу від херувимів, і незрівняно славнішу від серафимів, що без отління Бога Слово породила, сущу Богородицю тебе величаємо. Отця і Сина і Святого Духа. Амінь. Отця і Сина і Святого Духа. Амінь. Отця і Сина і Святого Духа. Дуже добрі доповіді. Дякую. Отче
Those were
Юрія.
very interesting presentations. Thank you very much. So Father Yuri, do you still have the same email you used to have? Because I would like to write you an email. And when you're in Munich, we need to meet for sure. I wrote you, and I will send you. Yeah, please send me an email.
Я завтра викладаю, не впевнений, я мушу подивитися, коли
Not sure I will be able to be there tomorrow because I have classes tomorrow. Was very happy to see you.
Слава Ісусу Христу.